As an urban sociologist, I research issues affecting minorities and the urban poor, with particular expertise in race, policing, and racial profiling. I approach research questions within urban studies from a sociological perspective. This enables one to understand and examine the manner in which social forces structure, influence, define, and constrict one's life and the life choices and opportunities that are or are perceived to be available to them based on their membership in the various cultural, economic, or social groups within society.
I am so excited to have as a guest with me today on Unbossed, the one and only Dr. Ronnie Dunn. Not only did we go to school together, went to college together, we testified before a traveling congressional committee together way back when in the 90s. We served on Governor John Kasich's task force on community and police relations. Dr. Dunn, you were on some committees for President Barack Obama, and your most recent book, Boycotts, Busing, and Beyond: The History and Implications of Cleveland School Desegregation Case, to examine the issue. So you're all over the place, and we're really gonna dig into your first book, the book that you wrote with Dr. Reed, which is Racial Profiling, Causes and Consequences. Dr. Dunn, it is such an honor to have you on the show today. Let's just get right into it, because I'm gonna have to have you on again. You lay out in the book, Racial Profiling, Causes and Consequences. You lay out the components of racial profiling, how those components impact the Black community. And so many people are still confused about racial profiling and its impact. Can you walk us through some highlights of your research, and why should people still care that racial profiling is still going on?
Well, sure, but first let me just thank you for allowing me this honor to be with you, my dear friend, Senator Turner. It's truly an honor. So racial profiling, I was thinking about it earlier today, and I've been doing this work for close to 30 years now, Nina. Years, and we have yet to really address this issue as a nation, or even at the state and local levels throughout this country for the most part. Why this is of such importance is the most frequent contact the average citizen has with police, and by extension the criminal justice system, comes through traffic stops. So, and as my research shows, and using the city of Cleveland as a case study, while African American were the majority of motorists stopped for traffic violations, we were not the majority of the driving population, nor when I used a radar gun to do speed readings along major traffic arteries, we weren't the majority of those speeders. Then that is the most frequent traffic citation. If you think about the number of citizens, unarmed citizens that have died as a result of a traffic stop, going from Philando Castillo, Samuel DuBose, to name a few. There are a number of names, and I can go back to the 90s, Johnny Gamage, such names as that exemplifies the importance of addressing this issue. If we can reduce and preclude these unnecessary and in many instances unconstitutional stops of citizens, we could then stop some of the losses of life and these volatile confrontations between police and the public and citizens.
And Dr. Dunn, we hear a lot about, if they had cooperated, or they're not cooperating, or their attitude. People say that, especially when it comes to the African American community. I rarely hear that type of language used when it comes to other of our sisters and brothers of other ethnicities and or races. why is the American psyche so fixated with the behavior of Black people, and why is that particular argument not relevant unless the person is indeed being violent, which we know some traffic stops can be deadly for members of law enforcement. My son is a member of law enforcement, so I get it. You and I were on that task force that had members of law enforcement on there, both in policing, on police departments and also sheriff department. So we get it. But my point right here is, why is that language used so often when it comes to the African American community and nobody else's behavior is policed?
Right. Well, there are a number of factors there, Senator. But first, I would say part of it is that the majority population's experience with law enforcement is so diametrically opposite that of the African American community. So, but there was one, the George Floyd case was an exemplar of a case that all of those traditional arguments that you hear raised were absent. And the reason that murder had such an impact as it did is because we were all held captive audience to witnessing that murder. And what I argue really made it different from all the other losses of Black lives throughout the generations, why we saw such a different response, was the fact that white families were at home, white parents were at home, isolated due to the COVID pandemic, and having to now explain to their 5, 6, 7-year-old child how something so atrocious could happen in America, where all of those arguments that are traditionally raised were absent. There were none of them present. And then when we talk about Blacks resisting or running from law enforcement, all we have to do is look at the Tyree Nichols case in Memphis. That, on the other hand, exemplifies why people might run from police. I'm not saying that's the thing to do, but there are instances where it's understandable why they would run.
And Dr. Dunn, as you described, it reminded me, when you talked about the families and everybody's at home and all of that kind of stuff, reminded me of some of what was happening during the civil rights movement. When those families and the white families in the North were sitting back looking at TV and they're like, what?
Yes.
What? This is happening in the South, and plus some of their babies was down there too. Let's go and put that out there as well. And so you're right, like this awakening that is starting to happen in this country, but certainly is not happening quick enough. Dr. Dunn, I think we only got about 60 seconds left. Let me ask you this: is reform possible? And I'm gonna have you back on the show because this is a topic that we gotta talk about in a deeper way and talk about often. But is reform possible?
Well, Nina, I would say it is, but we just have to have the political will to make it happen. And truthfully, I've long been arguing we need to move past reform and talk about transformation. We need to transform the relationship between the law enforcement institutions in this country and communities of color.
Yeah, I get that, Doc. I'm all about it too. Transformation, because we can't reform a legal system that is working exactly as it was designed to do. But this is the one and only Dr. Ronnie Dunn, associate professor at the Cleveland State University, a dear friend of mine and just absolutely brilliant.